Imagine being transported to a time where morality was worthless, where every desire could be satisfied without limits, and tomorrow was a distant, unreal illusion. A place where ostentatious opulence and wealth masked unprecedented spiritual and social decay, eroding the very essence of humanity. This is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, two sister cities that drowned in their own perversity, and of the fatal gaze that transformed a soul, a life, into an eternal monument of salt. A silent yet screaming testament to disobedience and irreversible choices. For millennia, the literalness of the events that befell these metropolises has been the subject of intense debate and profound reflection. Scientists and archaeologists delve into the ruins, searching for traces of a catastrophe that defies comprehension. Is the story of Lot's wife merely a timeless moral tale, passed down through generations to instill values, or a tangible portal to deep divine secrets and complex human dilemmas that echo with astonishing clarity even to this day? The narrative of Genesis imposes undeniable urgency. Obedience becomes not just a virtue, but a matter of life or death in moments of imminent judgment. What do modern science, with its rock and soil analyses, archaeology, with its millennial excavations, and psychology, with its understanding of the human mind, reveal to us about the crucial decision of a single, yet devastating, look back? Prepare for a journey that will transcend time and challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, obedience, and the consequences of a divided heart. Most people interpret Lot's wife's curiosity as a simple, innocent slip, a comprehensible moment of human weakness. But what truly lies behind this seemingly harmless retrospective gaze? It was not a mere distraction or a momentary lapse of attention, but the visceral manifestation of a deep and irreconcilable dissonance between the faith that should have guided her towards salvation and the sick, almost inescapable attachment to a condemned world. She was physically fleeing, running for her life, but her heart, her soul, remained irrevocably chained to the illusions of wealth, pleasure, and status that Sodom offered. The apparent security and ephemeral luxury of the city had eroded her ability to discern the true danger, obscuring the urgency of escape and the totality of the obedience required. It was an internal battle between the familiar and the unknown, between illusory comfort and real salvation. The divine warning in Genesis 19:17 was not merely a practical instruction about a physical place to be avoided. Do not look back, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be swept away. This order was, in fact, a powerful metaphor for total detachment, a radical demand for a complete and unquestionable break with the sinful past. Looking back represented the desire to retain something from that world, perhaps to mourn its loss, or even to doubt divine justice. The hidden flaw in the escape plan did not lie in the speed of her feet or the lack of physical determination, but in the gradual and silent petrification of her soul, an inner hardening that prevented her from truly moving forward and fully embracing the liberation offered. Obedience was not just external, but a condition of the heart. God's mercy extended to the very last second, offering a bridge to redemption, a clear promise of a new beginning far from destruction. However, this grace, though immense, demanded a total response, unquestioning obedience, and an immediate decision to break with what had been judged and condemned. That last look, therefore, was not merely an isolated act of disobedience, but the painful revelation of a broken expectation, of a covenant that, though extended, demanded a complete and immediate surrender. Grace reaches the last breath of life, but requires a definitive and unreserved choice. The soul hesitated, and that hesitation was fatal. The consequence was shocking, immediate, and visceral. Physical transformation into a pillar of salt, a literal and terrifying mirror of a spiritual petrification. Her soul, frozen in attachment to the past and to what had been destroyed, became as inert, as devoid of life and movement as the saline rock that encased her. It was not just a punishment, but the materialization of her inner state. It is the silent, desperate cry of the soul that stubbornly refuses to abandon the familiar and comfortable, even in the face of the promise of a new and liberating beginning, even when the familiar becomes lethal. This internal resistance, this inability to let go, led to eternal immobility. Just as nature hardens and fossilizes under constant exposure to the relentless sun and desert winds, the human heart can harden in disobedience, solidifying in its own resistance and becoming a monument to its own ruin and tragic choice. The destruction of Sodom is, for the most part, frequently associated in the popular mind solely with sexual sin, libertinism, and debauchery, creating a one-dimensional view of its perversity. However, myths about the true face of these cities are brutally debunked when the Bible itself reveals the depth and breadth of their widespread iniquity. Ezekiel 16:49-50 offers us a chilling and comprehensive perspective, unveiling layers of perversion that transcend individual acts. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen. The surprising and truly insidious factor that sabotaged these cities was not just sexual debauchery, which was merely a symptom of something deeper, but the immeasurable material abundance that generated arrogant pride, chronic laziness, and a cruel, inhumane indifference towards the poor, the foreigner, and the needy. This moral and social blindness prevented them from seeing the imminent judgment that awaited them, for their very prosperity had made them deaf to the cries for justice. Wealth, instead of generating gratitude and generosity, became a poison, isolating them in their self-sufficiency. Modern archaeology has tirelessly investigated possible locations of these legendary cities, and excavations have revealed compelling evidence suggesting a sudden catastrophe of colossal proportions. Some theories point to a devastating cosmic event, such as a meteor exploding in the atmosphere over the Jordan Valley, or a rain of fiery bitumen falling from the heavens, as described in the biblical text, that would impressively validate the account of destruction by sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Discoveries in places like Tall El Hammam, in Jordan, for example, have revealed thick layers of ash, pottery vitrified by extreme heat, bubbles in rocks indicating extremely high temperatures, and evidence of mass destruction by an aerial explosion, consistent with the biblical narrative of a sudden and sweeping ruin that engulfed the entire region. The magnitude of the devastation suggests an event that surpassed any known local natural disaster. These discoveries bring to light the divine logic behind the annihilation, not an act of blind and indiscriminate fury, but the surgical removal of a moral infection that threatened to metastasize and corrupt all humanity with its depraved lifestyle and contempt for justice. It was a drastic, painful, but necessary measure to preserve the path to the Abrahamic promise, protecting the lineage from which salvation would come and ensuring the continuity of faith in a world sinking into immorality. Lot, the only righteous man rescued through Abraham's intercession, serves as a reminder that even in the midst of divine judgment, justice distinguishes between the righteous and the wicked, offering escape to those who cry out for righteousness. The true history is that throughout the annals of humanity, countless ancient civilizations perished by ignoring clear and repeated signs of moral and social collapse, weaving a historical pattern of self-destruction. Grand empires fell due to their own iniquities, just as Rome, with its moral and social decay, its obsession with pleasures, and its growing indifference to the poor, mirrored the blindness and ruin of Sodom. Internal corruption, rampant lust, systemic social injustice, and a lack of compassion were foundations that, instead of sustaining, crumbled these societies, leaving behind only charred ruins and the persistent smell of sulfur in the air, an echo of the warning that Sodom, in its arrogance, refused to heed. History is an echo, and Sodom is a silent scream. Lot's story is a tragic and complex tale of choices and their relentless consequences, a mirror of the internal struggle many of us face. He was a divided man, a vivid example of the constant battle between faith, seeking the eternal, and the world's allure, offering the transient. His fatal error is one that, unfortunately, many commit unknowingly in their own lives, subtly and gradually. The incessant pursuit of material prosperity and economic security at the cost of spiritual closeness and deep communion with God. Genesis 13:10-13 narrates his hasty decision, based purely on material convenience, to choose the fertile plains of the Jordan, described as well-watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, a land of material promises and abundance, of livestock and pastures, deliberately ignoring the moral and spiritual risks of dwelling near Sodom, where the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. This choice, seemingly logical and beneficial from a material standpoint, contained within it the subtle yet dangerous signs that his faith was misaligning, progressively yielding to the seductive appeal of the worldly. The gradual tolerance of sin and the insidious accommodation to the world's values progressively led him to integrate into Sodom's environment, culminating in him sitting in the gate of Sodom. Genesis 19:1. Sitting at a city's gate was not just a matter of residence, but a place of influence, judgment, decision-making, and business. This indicated his growing integration, and perhaps his dangerous complacency with the iniquity that permeated the city. Lot, the righteous man, was now at the center of corruption, his eyes and heart becoming accustomed to what he should have abhorred. He was no longer a stranger, but part of the social fabric, which made his departure even more difficult and compromised his influence over his own family. Lot's rescue, though an act of pure divine mercy, was not a simple or cost-free happy ending. Despite being saved from physical destruction, he lost his wife in a devastating way, transformed into a pillar of salt, a monument to her own disobedience. His daughters, desperate for offspring in a world they believed to be empty of other men, committed acts that brought subsequent shame and bequeathed a legacy of moral complexity for future generations. This deep scar of worldly compromise and mistaken choices is a vivid reminder of the incalculable losses that the blind pursuit of material goods and ephemeral comfort can entail, even for those considered righteous or having an upright heart. Material security cannot compensate for moral bankruptcy. To discern the subtle and often imperceptible influence of the world in our own lives, a practical and essential exercise is to honestly evaluate the daily choices we make. Where do we place our true trust, our time, our financial resources, and our emotional investment? In what is ephemeral, transient, and material, or in what is eternal, spiritual, and imperishable? The key factor that determined Lot's survival, despite all his flaws, compromises, and errors, was God's persistent and powerful intercession with Abraham, which graciously extended to protect his nephew. It is an unequivocal testament to divine grace, working even amidst our deepest imperfections and character flaws, but not without the consequences of our choices reaching us and leaving their indelible marks on the soul and family history. Why can a single action, a mere fleeting look, have such profound, irreversible, and eternal consequences, capable of changing the course of a life and sealing a destiny so dramatically? The story of Lot's wife is a dark yet crucial reminder that disobedience, however minor it may seem in human eyes, however innocent a moment of weakness might appear, can have the devastating power to break the vital link with divine protection and with God's plan for our lives. It is not a mere fault or stumble, but a fundamental rupture, a conscious rejection of divine direction. The hidden flaw behind that look was not just a lapse of memory or a moment of involuntary weakness, as most of us would like to believe. It was an act of deliberate attachment, a conscious choice to retain what should have been categorically abandoned. Lot's wife looked back, not because she forgot the command, not out of mere curiosity, but because her heart, her soul, still resided in the riches, the illicit pleasures, the familiarity and the comfort, however corrupt they were, of the condemned city. She chose, in a decisive instant, to retain the past, even if it meant ignoring God's clear, saving, and imperative voice. This choice, driven by a sentimental, material, or emotional attachment, sealed her fate and condemned her to immobility. To know if you are on the right path, a simple yet incisive and direct test is to evaluate your readiness and your unconditional willingness to abandon the familiar, the comfortable, and what is only secure in the eyes of the world, in favor of divine direction, even if that direction seems uncertain, uncomfortable, or leads you into the unknown. True faith requires a leap of trust, a total surrender, a genuine detachment. To know if you are on the right path, a simple yet incisive and direct test is to evaluate your readiness and your unconditional willingness to abandon the familiar, the comfortable, and what is only secure in the eyes of the world, in favor of divine direction, even if that direction seems uncertain, uncomfortable, or leads you into the unknown. True faith requires a leap of trust, a total surrender, a genuine detachment. The silent and often underestimated factor that sabotages the faith of so many is the inertia of habit, comfortable routine, the weight of tradition, and the paralyzing fear of the unknown. These elements, like invisible and self-imposed chains, bind the soul to the familiar and often to the destructive, preventing spiritual progress and the true freedom that only obedience can provide. The shocking consequence of ignoring God's voice is terrifying in its finality. It is not just physical, material, or relational loss, but the petrification of the soul, a spiritual hardening so profound that it makes it incapable of moving forward, growing, receiving what is new, and surrendering to divine will. The petrified soul no longer responds to the divine call. It becomes inert, cold, like the pillar of salt, condemned to witness from afar what could have been. It is a timeless, urgent, and universal warning about the dangers of spiritual complacency and the prioritization of the transient and material over the eternal and divine. Disobedience is a corrosive force that, in an instant, can turn the promise of life into a monument of unlearned lessons. The pillar of salt of Lot's wife is one of the most striking, enigmatic, and symbolically rich images in the entire Bible. Its symbolism, however, goes far beyond a simple divine punishment. It delves into the mysteries of human choice, the nature of divine justice, and the irreversible consequences of disobedience. What does modern science reveal to us about the formation of salt statues in hostile environments? Crystallization is a chemical and physical process of solidification and immutability, analogous to the irreversibility of a definitive choice. Under certain extreme geological conditions, such as in hypersaline areas near the Dead Sea, rich in natural salt deposits and subject to geological events like bitumen and sulfur eruptions, prolonged and intense exposure to volcanic elements or a salt-saturated environment can lead to the formation of rock structures with a surprising appearance of figures or pillars through complex processes of sedimentation and mineralization. The rapid transformation of Lot's wife could be explained by a combination of these natural factors accelerated by a supernatural event. In the Bible, salt has multiple and complex meanings, many of them even contradictory, which enriches the depth of its metaphor. It is not just seasoning to add flavor and preserve, as instructed in Leviticus 2:13, which prescribes that all offerings and sacrifices be seasoned with salt, symbolizing incorruptibility, the permanence of the covenant, and the purity of an unbreakable pact with God. Soil salinization, a phenomenon known in agriculture, prevents vegetation growth, transforming fertile lands into desolate and unproductive deserts. The counterintuitive revelation, and perhaps the deepest lesson of this narrative, is that Lot's wife's pillar of salt is not merely an arbitrary act of divine punishment, a blind and disproportionate retribution. It is, in fact, a living monument, a stele erected to human choice itself and to God's non-negotiable, immutable, and absolute holiness. But salt can also represent sterility, desolation, destruction, and divine judgment, a bitter reminder of the consequences of sin. Deuteronomy 29:23 describes the land of Sodom and Gomorrah as burned with sulfur and salt, rendering it permanently sterile and lifeless, unable to sprout or sustain any form of life, a visible and lasting testament to the divine curse. It became an eternal and visible testimony to immediate and irrevocable disobedience, a perfect crystal in its form, yet inert in its essence, symbolizing the soul that stubbornly refused to detach itself from sin, remaining trapped in the past it should have abandoned. It became a constant reminder of the fine line between salvation and perdition, a line marked by a single fatal gaze. The practical consequence of this resonates powerfully in Jesus' words in Matthew 5:13, where he warns about the danger of salt without flavor. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. This underlines the vital importance of salting one's life with the Word of God, with obedience, with the purifying and preserving influence of the Holy Spirit, so as not to become useless, purposeless, and ultimately rejectable in the eyes of the Creator. Like a saline rock that, though solid, slowly dissolves over time and exposure to the elements, Lot's wife's pillar of salt remains, defying erosion, as a lasting testament to the fatal choice that led her to petrification, an unforgettable reminder that a single look back can cost everything. The mystery of Lot's wife, once a distant and perhaps misunderstood biblical enigma, now reveals itself as a startlingly precise mirror for our own daily choices. In every instant, in every decision we make, we are confronted with the eternal dichotomy between the past that holds us with its memories and errors, and the future that calls us with its promises and challenges. Between the mundane that seduces us with its ephemeral pleasures and the divine that redeems us with its eternal grace, we are constantly challenged to decide where to direct our gaze, our energy, our heart, our very soul. The tragic transformation of Lot's wife serves as a powerful and visual reminder of the insidious dangers of clinging to what holds us back, to what is familiar and comfortable, even when the divine itself imperatively calls us to move forward, to safety, to life. Ancient wisdom, as relevant today as it was millennia ago, echoes with crystalline clarity in the inspiring words of the Apostle Paul in Philippians 3:13-14. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. This is the essence of the journey of faith, of the Christian path, a continuous act of detachment from the past, its pains and its glories, and a projection towards the future, guided by unwavering hope and the divine promise of a greater purpose. Divine grandeur manifests not only in the fearsome power of destruction, in the annihilation of iniquities that threaten to corrupt creation and divert humanity from its purpose. It reveals itself even more sublimely in the patient, persistent, and loving offer of redemption. It is an offer made to those who, with courage, faith, and an obedient heart, consciously choose to look forward, abandon the burden of the past, detach themselves from the shackles of worldliness, and embrace the path God has reserved for them, a path of abundant life and eternal purpose. In a world of constant movement and transformation, where the ruins of past civilizations are silent witnesses to their choices and destinies, the pillar of salt of Sodom remains not as a mere distant moral tale, but as a living warning and an eternal call. Where are you looking? Will your gaze lead you to life or to stagnation and spiritual petrification? The choice is yours.